I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, my coffee turning cold on my desk. The text message had just arrived from my husband, Bradley. It read, "We have decided we are going to distance ourselves from you. Please do not look for us anymore." It was sent from his phone, but the cold, calculating words belonged entirely to my mother-in-law, Brenda. I did not cry. I did not panic or beg for an explanation. I simply typed my reply. "No problem. I am going to cancel the automatic payments for your house and your car. I will let you know when it is done. My name is Naomi. I am 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant for a major financial firm in downtown Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to financially cut off toxic family members who thought they could use you as their personal bank account forever. I placed my phone face down on my desk and looked out the window at the busy city streets below. For 4 years of marriage, I had been the silent, obedient provider for a family that viewed me with complete disdain. Bradley had been completely unemployed for 6 months. He constantly claimed he was just waiting for the perfect entrepreneurial opportunity to launch his startup. He felt traditional jobs were beneath him. While he waited, my paycheck kept him comfortable. More importantly, my paycheck kept his mother comfortable. Brenda always treated me like an uncultured outsider. She loved to boast to her country club friends about her beautiful 4-bedroom suburban home and her pristine silver Mercedes. She conveniently always forgot to mention that she had been facing foreclosure 3 years ago. I was the one who stepped in, created a private trust, and bought the house to keep a roof over her head. I was the one paying the monthly lease on that luxury vehicle. To Brenda, I was not a daughter-in-law. I was a human ATM machine, completely devoid of feelings, existing only to fund her illusion of high society wealth. They assumed I would be devastated by this abrupt text message. They thought my usual silence at their hostile family dinners meant I was weak. They calculated that I would desperately apologize for whatever imagined slight Brenda had invented this week just to keep Bradley in my life. They severely miscalculated. I opened a new browser tab on my computer monitor, completely ignoring my corporate audit reports for a moment. I navigated directly to my personal banking portal. My hands did not shake. My heart rate remained completely steady. In my line of work, I spend every single day hunting down hidden offshore accounts, exposing corporate embezzlement, and dismantling complex financial lies. I am trained to look at the cold, hard numbers and remove all emotion from the equation. That is exactly what I decided to do with my marriage. The portal loaded, displaying the joint and individual accounts I managed. I clicked directly over to the automatic payments dashboard. There it was at the top of the list. The monthly lease payment for Brenda's car, $2,000, scheduled to be automatically withdrawn from my account in exactly 48 hours. I hovered my mouse over the small red trash can icon next to the transaction. A dialog box popped up on the screen, asking if I was absolutely sure I wanted to permanently delete this recurring payment. I clicked confirm without a single second of hesitation. The payment vanished from the screen. Next, I scrolled down to the property expenses section. The mortgage payment for Brenda's suburban house sat there glaring at me. $4,500 a month. I clicked the red trash can icon again. Confirm. Deleted. Just to be absolutely thorough, I opened a second tab and logged into my insurance provider. I swiftly removed both the house and the car from my comprehensive coverage plan, making the changes effective immediately. The entire process took me less than 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, I completely dismantled the comfortable, entitled life they had been enjoying at my expense. I closed the browser tabs and returned to my forensic audit spreadsheet. I felt incredibly light. The heavy knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach since the day I married Bradley was completely gone. Suddenly, my phone began to vibrate violently against my desk. Bradley was calling. Then he called again. The reality of my text had hit him. He was panicking because his free ride was finally over forever. I took a slow sip of water and let it ring. I took a slow sip of water and let it ring. Let him panic. I needed to finish my quarterly report. But exactly 10 minutes later, a different notification sound broke the silence in my office. It was not a text from my husband. It was a high-priority, automated SMS from my primary financial institution. Fraud alert. Did you authorize an outgoing wire transfer of $50,000 from joint savings ending in 4829? Reply yes or no. I sat up straight. The casual satisfaction I felt just moments ago vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of a senior forensic auditor. $50,000. That was the entirety of our emergency liquid savings. It was money I had solely earned and deposited over the last 3 years, kept in a joint account simply because it was easier for managing household expenses. I typed no and hit send. Before the automated system could even reply, I dialed the bank's elite fraud department number. As a high net worth client, I bypassed the regular queue and was immediately connected to a representative named David. David, this is Naomi. I just received a fraud alert for a $50,000 wire transfer. I did not authorize this transaction. I need you to halt the wire immediately and freeze all accounts linked to my social security number. I heard the rapid clicking of David typing on his keyboard. Mrs. Naomi, I am looking at the transaction ledger now. The wire was initiated online exactly 11 minutes ago. The login originated from an IP address matching your home network. The credentials used belong to your husband Bradley. My jaw tightened. Bradley had initiated the transfer right after sending that ridiculous text message. They were trying to blindside me. They wanted to discard me but take my money to fund their new life. Where is the money going, David? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I need the exact destination routing details and the receiving institution. David hesitated for a fraction of a second, likely checking federal privacy protocols, but my tone left no room for debate. The destination is a business checking account registered to Apex Digital Assets. The primary account holder is listed as Jamal. Of course. Jamal. Jamal was my sister-in-law, Stephanie's husband. He was an African-American man who aggressively marketed himself as a self-made cryptocurrency broker and wealth guru. In reality, Jamal was a fast-talking opportunist who spent his days posting photos of rented luxury cars on social media and preaching about the decentralized finance revolution. At every single family gathering, Jamal made sure to loudly mock my corporate accounting career, calling it a slave wage trap for the uninspired. Bradley absolutely idolized him. Bradley believed Jamal held the secret to effortless wealth, and now my unemployed husband had stolen my life savings to buy into Jamal's unregulated crypto fantasy. David, I said, keeping my emotions completely detached, falling right into my professional element. My husband has been unemployed for 6 months. He has zero income. Those funds are my direct earnings, and he is attempting to funnel marital assets into an unregistered cryptocurrency brokerage to hide them prior to a separation. I am officially reporting this as unauthorized financial depletion and potential wire fraud. Freeze the joint savings. Freeze the joint checking. Lock his debit card. Block any secondary access to my individual accounts. Understood. Naomi. David replied, his tone shifting to strict compliance. The outgoing wire is currently in a pending state due to the large amount triggering our internal review system. I am intercepting it now. The funds will not leave the bank. I am also placing a hard lock on all joint assets under Regulation E protocols. Your husband will not be able to withdraw a single cent, nor will he be able to use his linked credit cards for any purchases. The $50,000 will remain frozen in the account pending a full internal fraud review. Thank you, David. Email me the transaction logs and the lock confirmation. I will be handling the rest from here. I ended the call and set the phone down. My heart beat with a slow, heavy rhythm. Bradley and his mother had not just insulted me. They had tried to rob me. They thought they could execute a coordinated strike, dumping me via text while simultaneously draining my bank account to fund Jamal's shady crypto hustle. They thought I would be too devastated, too busy crying over my failed marriage to check my bank balances. They forgot who they were married to. I track missing millions for Fortune 500 companies. Did they really think they could quietly siphon $50,000 from a forensic accountant without triggering my alarms? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my car keys. The workday was officially over. It was time to go home. I knew exactly where Bradley was, and I knew exactly who he was celebrating with. They thought they had won. They thought they were rich. I was about to walk into their victory party and show them exactly what happens when you try to steal from the woman who holds all the keys to your life. The drive from downtown Chicago to our rented house in the suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. I used that time to mentally inventory everything I needed to pack. I pulled into the driveway and parked behind Jamal's leased BMW. As I walked up the front steps, I did not even need to use my key. The front door was slightly ajar and loud booming laughter echoed from the living room. I pushed the door open and stepped into the entryway. The scene before me was like a perfectly staged photograph of unwarranted arrogance. Bradley was leaning against the kitchen island, holding a crystal champagne flute that I had purchased. Brenda was lounging on my expensive leather sofa, her feet resting on the coffee table. Across from her sat my sister-in-law, Stephanie, and her husband, Jamal. Jamal was holding court, gesturing wildly with his hands as he spoke. "We are talking generational wealth." Bradley. Jamal announced, his voice booming with the misplaced confidence of a man who had never actually built anything sustainable. "That 50,000 you just wired over, I already allocated it into the new decentralized liquidity pool. By next quarter, we are looking at a 400% return. You are practically a millionaire right now, my man." Bradley grinned, raising his glass to Jamal. "To financial freedom, and to dead weight finally being dropped." I stood quietly in the hallway observing them. They were celebrating a wire transfer that had already been intercepted and frozen by federal banking protocols. Jamal was bragging about allocating funds that never actually arrived in his shady Apex Digital Assets account. Brenda took a delicate sip of her champagne and sighed happily. "I told you, Bradley. You just needed to cut the cord. You have the mind of an entrepreneur. You were suffocating being married to someone so incredibly dull. All Naomi does is stare at spreadsheets all day. A boring little accountant who does not understand how the real world works. Now you can finally live the life you deserve." I stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and into the bright light of the living room. The room went completely silent. Bradley lowered his glass, his smug smile faltering for a split second before he forced it back onto his face. Brenda adjusted her posture, glaring at me with undisguised contempt. "Oh, look who decided to show up," Brenda sneered. "Did you get my text message? Or did you need me to draw you a chart to understand it?" I did not answer her. I did not yell, cry, or throw my purse. I maintained the exact same completely neutral expression I use when interviewing a corporate embezzler. I walked right past them, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and headed straight down the hall to the master bedroom. Behind me, I heard Jamal chuckle. "Let her pack, bro. She knows she is outmatched. You hold the cards now." I pulled my hard-shell suitcase from the closet and laid it flat on the bed. I did not pack clothes. I did not care about the designer dresses or the expensive shoes. I packed my passport, my birth certificate, the hard drive containing all my personal digital backups, and the physical files for my limited liability company. That company held the deed to Brenda's house and the title to her car. Bradley appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning against the frame to block my exit. He tried to look intimidating, but he just looked foolish. "I hope you understand that I am taking half of everything else," Naomi Bradley said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Jamal is going to set me up with a top-tier wealth management lawyer. You can keep your little accounting job, but I'm getting what is mine." I zipped my suitcase shut and looked him dead in the eyes. I actually felt a brief flicker of pity for his profound stupidity. He was threatening me with a wealth management lawyer using money he had just attempted to steal, which was currently locked down by a bank fraud department. Furthermore, as a forensic auditor, I knew something none of them realized yet. I had run a background trace on Jamal's crypto platform 2 weeks ago, just out of professional curiosity. Apex Digital Assets was already under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for operating as an unregistered security and running a suspected Ponzi scheme. Jamal was not a financial genius. He was a massive target for a federal indictment. "Excuse me?" I said softly, grabbing the handle of my suitcase and pushing past Bradley without waiting for him to move. I rolled my luggage back through the living room. Brenda raised her glass toward me in a mocking toast. "Goodbye, Naomi. Do not let the door hit you on your way out." I paused with my hand on the front doorknob. I looked back at the four of them celebrating their imaginary riches with my champagne in my rented house. "Enjoy the evening," I replied evenly. "It will be the last comfortable one you have for a very long time." I walked out, closing the door firmly behind me. I loaded my suitcase into my car, started the engine, and drove away into the Chicago night. I was heading to a luxury hotel downtown completely unbothered. They thought they had won the war. They had no idea that by tomorrow morning, the first massive bomb was going to detonate right in Brenda's driveway. I woke up the next morning in a king-size bed at a luxury downtown hotel, feeling more rested than I had in 4 years. The heavy burden of Bradley and his family was completely gone. I ordered room service, poured myself a cup of premium black coffee, and opened my laptop to check my work emails. The morning sun reflected off the Chicago skyline, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely in control of my own destiny. I had already reviewed the GPS tracking logs from the recovery company. I knew exactly what time the tow truck had arrived at her suburban house. It was 3:15 in the morning. They had quietly hooked up the silver Mercedes, dragging it right off the manicured driveway, while Brenda and Bradley were fast asleep dreaming of their stolen $50,000. The efficiency of a professional repossession agency is truly a beautiful thing to witness. At exactly 8:45, my phone screen violently lit up. The caller ID displayed Brenda's name in bold letters. I knew exactly why she was calling. I let the phone ring 4 times, letting her panic simmer, before I finally swiped to answer. I pressed the speaker button, set the phone down on the glass desk, and leaned back in my chair. "Naomi, you deceitful little thief!" Brenda screamed the moment the line connected. Her voice was so loud and shrill that it practically rattled the phone speaker. It was completely stripped of her usual fake country club sophistication. "Where is my car? You sneaked back here in the middle of the night and stole my Mercedes. I am calling the police right now and having you arrested for grand theft auto." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "I did not steal anything, Brenda," I replied, my voice perfectly level and calm. "I simply stopped paying for it." "What are you talking about?" she shrieked, her breathing heavy and frantic. "My car is gone. It was parked right in the driveway last night when we went to sleep, and now it is completely gone. There are tire tracks on the lawn. You took it because you are bitter and jealous of my son's new financial success. You could not stand seeing us happy." I actually laughed out loud at the sheer delusion. "Brenda, I sent Bradley a very clear text message yesterday afternoon. I specifically told both of you that I was canceling the automatic payments for your car and your house. I also canceled the comprehensive insurance policy covering the vehicle." I paused to let those words hang in the air before delivering the cold legal reality. Since my personal limited liability company is the sole entity on the lease agreement, allowing you to drive that vehicle without proper insurance coverage is a massive financial liability to my firm. Therefore, I immediately notified the dealership and the leasing agency that the vehicle was uninsured and the payments were permanently halted. They dispatched a night recovery team to repossess the asset. The car is safely sitting in an impound lot right now. It belongs to the bank now, Brenda. You have absolutely zero legal claim to it." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as the horrific realization finally sank in. "Repossessed," Brenda gasped, her voice dropping to a shocked whisper. You had my luxury car repossessed in the middle of the night. You cannot do that to me. That is my property. My neighbors probably saw the tow truck. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I need that car for my charity luncheon today. How am I supposed to get there? What am I supposed to tell my friends? Call an Uber, I said, or take the city bus. I am sure the public transit schedule is readily available online. You can tell your friends the truth. You can tell them your daughter-in-law finally closed her wallet. Or better yet, why do you not just ask Jamal to buy you a brand new car today? He was bragging so loudly about his incredible cryptocurrency wealth last night. Surely he can afford to buy his mother-in-law a new Mercedes in cash. That comment pushed Brenda entirely over the edge. She lost whatever remaining shred of sanity she was holding on to. You listen to me, you arrogant little calculator! She snarled, her voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated rage. You think you can humiliate me in front of my entire neighborhood. You think you can just cut off my family and walk away like you own the world. We are not done with you. I am going to destroy your pathetic life. I am coming down to your precious corporate office today, and I am going to tell your bosses exactly what kind of vindictive, unstable woman you are. I am going to make sure you lose your high-paying job and end up with absolutely nothing. You will pay for this, Naomi. I smiled at the phone. They were walking right into my next trap. I look forward to seeing you, Brenda, I said. I ended the call, picked up my coffee, and went back to my spreadsheets. The first domino had officially fallen. She thought showing up at my workplace would intimidate me. She thought she could use social pressure to force me into submission, just like she always did at family gatherings. But a corporate accounting firm is not a suburban dining room. It is a highly secure environment, governed by strict legal protocols and heavily armed security guards. If Brenda and Bradley wanted to bring their toxic circus to my professional territory, I was more than ready to shut down the entire show. I closed my laptop, walked over to the closet, and selected my sharpest tailored suit. It was going to be a very productive day at the office. I walked through the revolving glass doors of my firm at exactly 8:45. The marble lobby of the downtown high-rise was perfectly climate-controlled and echoed only with the quiet clicking of leather dress shoes. I swiped my corporate badge at the turnstile, greeted the front desk security guards by name, and took the express elevator to the 42nd floor. My morning proceeded exactly as planned. I finalized the audit report I had been working on and submitted it to my managing director. At precisely 11:15, my desk phone rang. It was the head of building security, a retired police lieutenant named Gregory. Naomi, we have a situation in the main lobby. Gregory said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. There is an older woman and a younger man down here demanding to speak with your human resources director. They are causing quite a disturbance. The woman is screaming that you stole her vehicle and left her destitute. We are prepared to have them escorted out, but standard corporate policy requires us to notify you first. Thank you, Gregory, I replied smoothly. Do not call human resources. I will be right down to handle this. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my charcoal gray blazer, and picked up a slim leather folder from my desk drawer. I had printed the necessary documents the moment I arrived at work, anticipating Brenda would follow through on her hysterical threat. When the elevator doors opened to the main lobby, the sound of Brenda's shrill voice immediately assaulted my ears. She was standing near the central reception desk, pointing her manicured finger at a very patient receptionist. Bradley stood right behind her, trying to look intimidating with his arms crossed over his chest, but he mostly just looked out of place in his wrinkled polo shirt surrounded by sharp corporate professionals. "She is a criminal!" Brenda yelled, her face flushed red with anger. "She used her corporate accounting access to steal my luxury vehicle in the middle of the night. She is unstable and abusive to my son. I demand to speak to her supervisor immediately. You cannot employ someone who financially abuses her own family." A few passing executives paused to watch the spectacle. Gregory and two large security guards were slowly boxing them in, ready to intervene. I walked calmly across the marble floor, my heels echoing sharply, drawing everyone's attention. Brenda, I said, projecting my voice so it carried clearly across the large open space. You are trespassing on private commercial property. Brenda whipped her head around to face me. Her eyes widened with pure venom. There she is! She shrieked, taking a step toward me before a security guard firmly blocked her path. Tell your bosses what you did, Naomi. Tell them how you left an older woman stranded without a car. We are filing a police report. You are going to lose your job today. Bradley chimed in, puffing out his chest. We warned you, Naomi. Jamal already gave us the contact information for his lawyers. You cannot just take our property and think you can get away with it. I completely ignored Bradley. I turned my attention directly to Gregory, who was standing by with a deeply unamused expression. I opened my leather folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper with an official state seal at the top. Gregory, I apologize for the disruption, I said in a clear professional tone. These individuals are my estranged husband and his mother. They are currently upset because a vehicle they were allowed to use was legally repossessed last night due to non-payment. For your records, here is the official state registration and the limited liability company formation documents. I handed the paper to the security chief. He reviewed it quickly. As you can see, I continued making sure my voice was loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear the silver Mercedes in question is wholly owned by a private asset holding company. I am the sole managing director of that company. Bradley's name is not on the lease. Brenda's name is not on the title. They have absolutely zero ownership rights to the vehicle. They are simply angry that their free ride has been terminated. Gregory handed the document back to me and nodded. He turned to Brenda and Bradley, his posture instantly shifting from cautious to authoritative. You have no legal standing here, Gregory stated firmly. This is a private corporate building, and you are harassing one of our senior executives. You have exactly 30 seconds to walk out those revolving doors before I call the Chicago Police Department and have you both arrested for criminal trespassing and disturbing the peace. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer humiliation of the moment finally caught up with her. The surrounding professionals were whispering and looking at her with total disgust. She was not the wealthy victim she was pretending to be. She was just a screaming fraud who got caught. Come on, Mom. Bradley muttered, his bravado entirely deflating as he grabbed her arm. Let's go. Jamal will fix this. We will just get Jamal to buy you a better car. I watched them scramble toward the exit, their faces burning with embarrassment. Bradley was desperately clinging to his delusion that his brother-in-law was going to save them with imaginary cryptocurrency millions. He had absolutely no idea that Jamal was currently fighting a massive battle of his own, and the promised bailout was completely non-existent. As they disappeared through the glass doors, I simply thanked Gregory and returned to my office. The embarrassment they tried to inflict on me had backfired spectacularly, but I knew Bradley's desperate reliance on Jamal was about to trigger an even bigger disaster. The illusion of their wealth was cracking, and the foundation was ready to collapse. I settled back into my office chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I knew exactly what Bradley would do next. He was a coward who always looked for a savior when his own actions blew up in his face. And right now, his designated savior was Jamal. I did not have to wait long to hear how that conversation played out. When we first moved into that rented suburban house, I had insisted on installing a high-end smart security system. The cameras were strategically placed at all the main entry points, including the central living room. Since I was the one paying the monthly subscription, the master account, and all the administrative privileges belonged entirely to me. Just before lunch, my phone screen flashed with a motion detection alert from the living room camera. I quickly minimized my spreadsheets, plugged my wireless headphones into my computer, and opened the security application. The live video feed loaded in crisp high definition. Bradley and Brenda had just walked through the front door looking completely defeated. Jamal and Stephanie were sitting on the couch. Jamal was tapping furiously on his phone while Stephanie was flipping through a luxury lifestyle magazine. Jamal, we have a massive problem, Bradley announced, pacing back and forth across the living room rug. Naomi completely humiliated us at her corporate office. She had legal paperwork showing she owns the car through some shell company. She is trying to leave us with absolutely nothing. We need to strike back right now. Jamal looked up, his confident demeanor slipping for a fraction of a second. Strike back how, man? I need you to pull some of those crypto millions you were talking about last night. Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. We need to hire a top-tier divorce lawyer to destroy her in court, and my mother needs a new car today. Just withdraw 20 or 30 grand from the 50,000 I sent you. You said it was already quadrupling in value. Through the camera feed, I watched Jamal physically swallow hard. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He stood up, avoiding Bradley's direct gaze, and started rubbing the back of his neck. Listen, bro. Jamal started, his fast-talking salesman persona suddenly sounding incredibly shaky. You have to understand how decentralized finance works. You cannot just treat it like an ATM. Your capital is currently staked in a high-yield liquidity lockup. It is part of a smart contract staging phase. Pulling it out now would incur massive penalties and destroy our entire projected yield curve. Bradley stopped pacing. The confusion on his face was painfully obvious. What does that even mean? I transferred cold hard cash from my savings account to your business account yesterday. Just wire it back to me. Jamal nervously adjusted his collar. It is not that simple, Bradley. The funds are locked. The blockchain requires a mandatory holding period. Suddenly, Stephanie slammed her magazine down on the coffee table and stood up to defend her husband. Do not interrogate Jamal, Bradley. This is exactly what Naomi wants. She wants to divide this family. She is a soulless corporate drone who only cares about money and control. She is trying to make you panic, so you will go crawling back to her. Jamal is a visionary. He is building our empire. You just need to be patient and let him do his job. Brenda chimed in from the kitchen, her voice trembling with leftover anger from our lobby encounter. Stephanie is right. Naomi is vindictive. But we need a lawyer, Jamal. She cannot just kick us to the curb. We need cash to fight her. Bradley stepped closer to Jamal, his desperation turning into aggressive frustration. Jamal, I am not asking for a favor. That was my money. I stole it from my own joint account. If Naomi files a police report, I am the one going to jail. You need to give me my money back right now. Jamal backed away, his hands raised in a defensive posture. The pressure was finally cracking him. Look, man, I cannot just give it back. He snapped, his voice rising in panic. I already routed the capital through an offshore tumbler in the Cayman Islands to avoid domestic tax liabilities. The federal heat on crypto is too high right now. If I try to pull an international wire back into my domestic accounts today, it will flag the IRS and the SEC. The money is gone offshore, Bradley. It is out of my hands until the holding period clears. I sat frozen at my desk, a wide smile spreading across my face. I reached up and clicked the secure download button on my security portal. I saved the high-definition video and audio file directly to my encrypted external hard drive. Jamal had just confessed to international wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering, all while Stephanie defended his character and Bradley admitted to stealing the funds. They had handed me the ultimate weapon on a silver platter. The $50,000 had never even made it to the Caymans, of course, because David at the fraud department had frozen it. Jamal was lying to cover up the fact that his accounts were likely already seized by federal investigators. I took off my headphones, feeling completely invincible. The financial trap was fully set, and it was time to let the IRS do the heavy lifting. The financial trap was fully set, and it was time to let the IRS do the heavy lifting. Ironically, the federal government was already moving faster than I had anticipated. Later that afternoon, I left my corporate office and drove to a local postal facility in downtown Chicago. The very morning I moved out of the rented house, I had filed a premium intercept and forward request for all mail bearing my name. I was not about to let Bradley or Brenda have access to my sensitive financial documents. The postal worker handed me a thick stack of redirected envelopes. I carried them back to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and began sorting through the pile. There were the usual credit card offers, a magazine subscription, and a dental reminder. But halfway through the stack, my hands stopped moving. I was staring at a stark white envelope with the official seal of the Department of the Treasury printed in the top left corner. It was addressed to both Bradley and me. I tore the envelope open and unfolded the thick paper. It was an official CP-05 notice from the Internal Revenue Service. Notice of intent to audit. I read the document twice, my forensic accounting brain rapidly processing the numbers. I felt a cold surge of absolute disbelief at my husband's sheer stupidity. According to the IRS summary, Bradley had filed a joint tax return for us 3 months ago. He had done this completely electronically, forging my digital signature and bypassing the accountant we usually hired. But the real crime was what he had actually filed. Bradley had claimed over $80,000 in deductible business losses for his imaginary startup company. He had classified his video game console, his expensive dinners with Jamal, and his personal gym membership as crucial business development expenses. By offsetting my high corporate salary with his massive fraudulent losses, he had generated a massive, entirely illegal tax refund of nearly $20,000. He had routed that refund directly into a private checking account I did not even know existed. The IRS is not an entity you want to deceive. Their automated flagging systems are incredibly sophisticated. An unemployed man suddenly claiming $80,000 in phantom business expenses against a high-earning spouse was a massive red flag. Now the federal government was demanding full receipts, ledgers, and proof of business operations within 30 days, or we would face severe financial penalties and potential criminal tax evasion charges. Bradley had committed federal tax fraud in my name. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had scored free money from the government to fund his lazy lifestyle. He had absolutely no idea that his little stunt had just triggered a federal audit that could carry prison time. I did not panic. Panic is for people who do not know the law. I knew exactly what to do. I started my car and drove straight back to my luxury hotel room. I opened my laptop and immediately logged into the official IRS secure portal. I downloaded Form 8379, which is the Injured Spouse Allocation. In the financial world, this document is a legal shield. It explicitly separates a joint tax liability, proving to the federal government that one spouse is entirely innocent of the fraudulent claims made by the other. I meticulously filled out the form, attaching copies of my independent W-2 statements and a sworn notarized affidavit stating that my digital signature had been forged by my husband without my knowledge or consent. I formally requested that all tax liabilities, penalties, and criminal investigations be assigned solely to Bradley. I also attached a secondary fraud alert notifying the agency that the bank account used to receive the illegal refund was exclusively controlled by him. I packaged the entire file into a secure digital transmission and sent it directly to the federal assigned case agent listed on the notice. I closed my laptop and let out a long breath. The relief was profound. I had just built a massive legal firewall between my hard-earned money and his impending federal disaster. Bradley was currently sitting in that rented suburban house begging Jamal for fake cryptocurrency millions, completely unaware that a federal tax audit was speeding right toward him. He had tried to ruin my credit and steal my savings, but he had actually handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy his future. I walked over to the hotel window and looked out at the city lights. The board was set. He had made his move, and I had just countered with a federal indictment. His entire world was about to collapse, and I was going to watch it happen from a very comfortable distance. His entire world was about to collapse, and I was going to watch it happen from a very comfortable distance. That comfortable distance lasted exactly until the following morning. I woke up, reached for my phone on the hotel nightstand, and noticed an unusual flood of notifications. My screen was cluttered with alerts from social media applications and direct messages from numbers I rarely interacted with. I unlocked the device and opened the first message. It was from a mutual friend named Amanda, someone I had invited to my wedding. The message was incredibly aggressive. It read, "I cannot believe what you are doing to Bradley. You need serious psychological help." I furrowed my brow and opened the main social media application. The source of the outrage immediately became clear. Brenda had taken her grievances public. She had authored a massive, highly dramatized essay on her page, complete with a heavily filtered photograph of Bradley looking somber and defeated. The post was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and weaponized victimhood. According to Brenda's fictional narrative, I was a deeply controlling, financially abusive wife who had spent years suffocating her brilliant entrepreneurial son. She claimed that I had abruptly abandoned the marriage without warning, drained all of their joint resources out of pure spite, and ruthlessly stolen her only means of transportation in the dead of night. She painted herself as a frail, terrified senior citizen who was now entirely dependent on the charity of her community because of my sociopathic cruelty. The post ended with a dramatic plea for prayers and legal recommendations to help her poor son escape my tyrannical grasp. The comment section was an absolute echo chamber of toxic outrage. Extended family members, people from their country club, and casual acquaintances were completely buying into the lie. They were calling me a narcissist, a gold digger, and a monster. Some even suggested that Bradley should sue me for emotional distress. My direct message inbox was rapidly filling up with angry paragraphs from people who had never bothered to check in on me during my 4 years of marriage, but were now suddenly experts on my character. A normal person might have felt the urge to defend themselves. A normal person might have frantically typed out a counterpost airing all the dirty laundry about the stolen $50,000, the fake cryptocurrency investments, and the looming federal tax audit. I am not a normal person. I am a professional investigator. I do not argue with angry mobs on the internet. I gather evidence. I sat up in bed, poured myself a glass of water, and went to work. I did not block anyone. I did not delete a single hateful comment. Instead, I activated the screen recording software on my laptop and mirrored my phone. I meticulously scrolled through Brenda's entire post. I expanded every single comment. I opened every abusive direct message. I made sure the dates, times, and profile names were clearly visible on the screen. I captured the digital footprint of every single lie they were spreading. In the legal world, public defamation is a very serious matter. By posting these blatant falsehoods and inciting a targeted harassment campaign against me, Brenda had just crossed the line from a bitter mother-in-law to a civil liability. She was publicly accusing a licensed financial professional of theft and financial abuse. In my line of work, reputation is everything. Her post was not just an insult. It was a direct threat to my livelihood, which meant it carried massive financial damages. I organized the screenshots and video recordings into a secure digital folder labeled Defamation and Harassment. I then drafted a concise email to the ruthless corporate divorce attorney I had retained earlier that week. I attached the folder and requested that he immediately add cyber harassment and defamation of character to our growing list of legal grievances. I also instructed him to prepare a formal cease and desist letter, holding it in reserve for the perfect moment. I closed my laptop and got dressed for the day. Brenda thought she was winning the public relations war. She thought farming likes and sympathy on the internet would somehow shield her from reality. She was completely oblivious to the fact that social media sympathy does not pay the bills. Her online followers could leave as many angry comments as they wanted, but none of them were going to step up and pay her mortgage. While she was busy typing out lies on her phone, the real world was marching right up to her front door. The legal machinery I had set into motion was about to deliver a reality check that no amount of internet sympathy could fix. The legal machinery I had set into motion was about to deliver a reality check that no amount of internet sympathy could fix. Exactly 48 hours after Brenda posted her fabricated story of victimhood online, the real world arrived at her doorstep in the form of a process server. It was a bright Thursday afternoon. The server walked straight up the manicured walkway of the suburban home Brenda loved to show off to her country club friends. He did not bother to ring the doorbell or wait for a polite greeting. He simply took a roll of heavy-duty tape and affixed a bright neon green legal document directly to the center of the custom oak front door. Brenda discovered the document an hour later when she stepped outside to check the mail. She tore the paper off the wood, her eyes scanning the bold black lettering at the top of the page. It was a formal 3-day notice to pay or quit. She stormed back into the house, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and intense anger. She found Bradley sitting on the living room sofa, mindlessly scrolling through his phone while waiting for Jamal to magically produce their stolen funds. Brenda threw the neon green paper directly onto his lap. "Bradley, what is this?" she demanded, her voice echoing sharply through the vaulted ceiling of the living room. "It says we have 3 days to pay, or they are going to begin eviction proceedings. I told you to handle the mortgage with the money you took from Naomi. Did you forget to make the transfer? Are you trying to get us thrown out into the street?" Bradley picked up the paper, his brow furrowing as he read the legal jargon. He looked genuinely perplexed. "Mom, calm down," he said dismissively. "This has to be some kind of clerical error. We do not pay rent. We own this house. I signed the closing papers myself 3 years ago when we bailed you out of foreclosure. I will just call the bank and clear this up. They probably just crossed some wires when Naomi canceled the autopay." Bradley pulled out his cell phone and dialed the bolded number at the bottom of the notice. He fully expected to be connected to a generic customer service representative at a national bank. Instead, the phone rang twice before a stern woman answered. "Sterling Property Management, this is Diane. How can I help you?" Bradley puffed out his chest, adopting his usual tone of unearned authority. "Yes, Diane. This is Bradley. You people just taped a ridiculous eviction notice to my front door. There has been a massive mistake. I am the homeowner. I pay a mortgage, not rent. You need to send someone back here immediately to remove this notice and update your files." "I can assure you there is no mistake on our end," Diane replied, her voice entirely devoid of customer service warmth. "I am looking at the master file for your address right now. You are not the homeowner, Bradley. You are listed as a month-to-month residential tenant." Bradley let out a condescending laugh. "Listen to me very closely. 3 years ago, my mother was facing foreclosure. My wife and I stepped in and bought the property. I remember sitting in the real estate office and signing a massive stack of paperwork. I own that house. You signed a standard residential lease agreement." "Bradley," Diane corrected him, her tone completely uncompromising. "The property was purchased in cash directly from the foreclosing bank 3 years ago. The sole purchaser and current legal owner of the property is the Horizon Asset Protection Trust." Bradley felt a sudden icy drop in his stomach. "What trust?" he stammered. "Who runs that trust? According to the county deed records and our property management contract," Diane explained patiently, "the sole trustee and ultimate beneficiary of the Horizon Asset Protection Trust is Naomi. She contracted our firm to manage the property. For the past 3 years, she has been privately transferring the monthly rental amount to our agency to cover your tenancy. Yesterday, she formally terminated that payment arrangement and instructed us to enforce the lease. Your rent is severely past due. You have exactly 3 days to pay the full balance of $4,500, or the sheriff will physically remove you and your mother from the premises." The line went dead. Bradley slowly lowered the phone, his face draining of all color. He looked at Brenda, who was tapping her foot impatiently, waiting for him to fix the problem. "What did the bank say?" Brenda snapped. "It was not the bank," Bradley whispered, his voice trembling, as the catastrophic reality finally crushed his ego. "Mom, we do not own this house. We never did. Naomi bought it under a blind trust. She is the landlord. She is officially evicting us." Brenda staggered backward, grabbing the edge of the kitchen counter for support. The illusion of her high society life shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces. They had spent years treating me like a disposable asset, completely unaware that I literally owned the roof over their heads. The 3-day countdown had officially begun, and they had absolutely nowhere to run. The 3-day countdown had officially begun, and they had absolutely nowhere to run. Bradley was not a man who handled desperation well. He had spent his entire adult life being shielded from the consequences of his own actions. Now the walls were closing in with terrifying speed. He could not access the stolen $50,000. He could not get a straight answer out of his brother-in-law. And now he was facing imminent homelessness. Instead of accepting reality, his entitled brain decided that the only logical solution was to physically force me to undo the damage. He knew he could not confront me at my corporate office again after the humiliating lobby incident, so he waited across the street from my building until I left work on Friday evening. He sat in a cheap rental car courtesy of Jamal's dwindling funds and followed my Uber through the downtown Chicago traffic. He trailed me all the way to my new residence. I had moved into a premium high-rise apartment building in the Gold Coast neighborhood. It was not just a place to sleep. It was a verifiable fortress. The building featured a 24-hour armed concierge desk, biometric scanners at the resident entrances, and key fob-restricted elevator access. It was designed specifically to keep people like Bradley entirely out of my life. I had barely unpacked my briefcase and poured myself a fresh cup of French press coffee when the intercom unit on my kitchen wall buzzed loudly. I pressed the receive button. "Good evening, Naomi," the head concierge, a stern man named Thomas said in a highly professional tone. "I apologize for the intrusion. We have a highly agitated individual in the main lobby. He is claiming to be your husband and is demanding that we grant him immediate access to your suite. He is waving a stack of papers and yelling about a property deed." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I am looking at the lobby security feed right now on my tablet, Thomas," I replied smoothly. "He is my estranged husband. He does not have permission to be on the premises. Please instruct him to leave immediately." I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing the high-definition lobby camera into full view. The building had microphones integrated into the security system, allowing me to hear every single word. Bradley was standing aggressively close to the marble concierge desk. He looked completely unhinged. His hair was messy, and he was violently slapping a printed copy of the eviction notice against the polished counter. "You are going to let me up there right now!" Bradley shouted, pointing a finger directly at Thomas. "She is my wife. She stole my house. I have papers for her to sign. She is going to sign this property over to me today, or I am going to tear this building apart looking for her." "Sir, I am going to ask you to step back from the desk," Thomas warned, gesturing for the 2 large security guards standing near the front doors to approach. "You are trespassing on private property. The resident has explicitly denied you entry. If you do not exit the building right now, we will involve law enforcement." Bradley scoffed his arrogance, completely blinding him to the danger he was in. "Call them. Call the cops. Tell them my crazy wife is trying to steal my family home. I am not leaving until she comes down here and signs the deed transfer." Thomas did not argue. He simply picked up his radio and nodded to the guards. Within 3 minutes, the flashing blue and red lights of a Chicago Police Department cruiser reflected through the glass revolving doors. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the lobby. Bradley immediately tried to play the victim. "Officers, thank God you are here." He started walking toward them with his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "My wife is upstairs having a mental breakdown. She is trying to illegally evict my elderly mother. I just need to get up there and make her sign these papers." The officers did not even look at his ridiculous papers. They looked at Thomas, who calmly stated that Bradley had threatened to tear the building apart and refused to leave the private commercial premises. "Sir, put your hands behind your back," the taller officer ordered, reaching directly for his handcuffs. "What? No, you are not listening to me," Bradley protested, his false confidence instantly evaporating into genuine panic. I am the victim here. She has all my money. Bradley made the worst mistake possible in that situation. He physically jerked his arm away from the officer and tried to shove past him toward the resident elevators. It was a futile, profoundly stupid gesture. Within 2 seconds, both officers tackled him to the polished marble floor. The sharp click of metal handcuffs echoed clearly through my tablet speaker. I watched the entire scene unfold from the comfort of my leather sofa. I took another slow, satisfying sip of my French press coffee. Bradley was dragged out of the lobby by his arms, his face red and contorted with fury as he shouted my name. He had come to my fortress to intimidate me into giving up my property. Instead, he had just earned himself a night in a holding cell with a criminal charge for trespassing and resisting arrest. His desperate stunt had failed miserably, but I knew the ripple effects of his arrest were going to push his enablers into an even deeper state of panic. His desperate stunt had failed miserably, but I knew the ripple effects of his arrest were going to push his enablers into an even deeper state of panic. The very next morning, my phone vibrated with a text message from a number I had not blocked yet. It was my sister-in-law, Stephanie. The message was frantic, lacking all the smug confidence she had displayed on my living room security camera the day before. She begged me to meet her for a quick coffee. She swore she was coming alone and that it was a matter of life and death. I agreed to meet her at a busy upscale cafe right across the street from my corporate office. I always prefer public spaces for confrontations. It strips people of their ability to cause a dramatic scene. I arrived early, ordered a matcha latte, and opened a very specific financial file I had prepared. 10 minutes later, Stephanie walked through the glass doors. The transformation was startling. The woman who usually wore head-to-toe designer labels and looked down on my accounting career was currently wearing sweatpants and a visibly wrinkled sweater. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept looking over her shoulder as if she expected federal agents to tackle her in the pastry line. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Naomi, thank God, Stephanie whispered, her voice cracking instantly. Everything is falling apart. Bradley is still in a holding cell. The police will not release him without bail, and Brenda has absolutely no cash. She maxed out her credit cards trying to buy a replacement car yesterday, and every dealership rejected her financing. I took a sip of my latte, completely unbothered by this update. That sounds like a terrible situation for them, I replied evenly. Why are you telling me this? Stephanie leaned in closer, tears welling up in her eyes. Because Jamal cannot help them either. We woke up this morning and all of his banking applications were locked. The bank said there is a federal hold on his business accounts and his personal checking. He told me it is just a routine regulatory audit because his crypto platform is growing so fast, but he has zero access to liquidity right now. Naomi, I am begging you. I know Bradley messed up, but we are family. I need a loan. Just $10,000 to post Bradley's bail and hire a defense attorney for Jamal to clear up this bank error. We will pay you back the second the accounts unfreeze. I looked at Stephanie. For a brief second, I wondered if she was complicit in the fraud or just blindingly ignorant. Given her genuine panic, I decided it was the latter. She really believed her husband was a cryptocurrency genius who was simply experiencing a minor administrative roadblock. I am not giving you a loan, Stephanie, I said, my voice cutting through her tears like a scalpel. But I am going to give you something much more valuable. I am going to give you the truth. I opened the leather folder on the table and slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth wooden surface. It was a forensic flowchart I had generated using the transaction logs from the joint account. Stephanie looked down at the paper, her brow furrowing in confusion. What is this? This is the actual financial footprint of the $50,000 Bradley stole from me 2 days ago, I explained. Jamal told you and Bradley that he routed the money through an offshore tumbler in the Cayman Islands to avoid taxes, correct? He claimed it was locked in a high-yield liquidity pool. Stephanie nodded slowly, her eyes darting across the columns of numbers and dates. Yes, he said it was securing our financial future. I tapped my fingernail against the final destination box on the flowchart. Jamal is a liar, Stephanie. The money never left the country. The bank fraud department intercepted the initial wire, but before the total freeze took effect, Jamal managed to divert a significant portion of his own existing funds using Bradley's incoming transfer as false collateral, and he did not invest it in cryptocurrency. I watched the color completely drain from her face as she read the name of the vendor listed at the end of the transaction line. He spent it at an exclusive boutique in Miami, I stated clearly. He purchased 2 solid gold luxury watches, one for himself and one for a female associate whose name is not Stephanie. The SEC is not auditing him because he is successful. They froze his accounts because they are preparing to indict him for running a fraudulent Ponzi scheme. Your husband did not build an empire. He built a house of cards using stolen money, and it just collapsed. Stephanie sat perfectly still. The tears stopped falling, replaced by a look of profound, sickening realization. The blind loyalty she had shown him just yesterday was entirely gone. I closed my folder and stood up from the booth. I left her sitting there with the undeniable proof of her husband's ultimate betrayal. The unified front of my in-laws was officially broken, and they were about to start tearing each other apart. With Stephanie completely out of the picture, the burden of rescuing Bradley fell entirely onto Brenda's shoulders. And Brenda was completely out of options. She had maxed out every credit card to her name, trying to finance a replacement luxury vehicle the day before. Now her son was sitting in a downtown Chicago holding cell facing a misdemeanor, trespassing, and resisting arrest charge. The judge had set his bail at a modest amount, requiring just a $1,500 cash deposit to a bondsman for his release. For a woman who constantly bragged about her country club lifestyle, $1,500 should have been absolute pocket change, but for Brenda it was an insurmountable fortune. I learned exactly how she managed to scrounge up the cash a few days later from a mutual acquaintance who witnessed the entire humiliating ordeal. Driven by pure desperation and a ticking clock, Brenda decided to liquidate her most prized possessions. For years, she had flaunted a massive diamond tennis bracelet and a matching sapphire necklace at every family holiday. She loudly claimed they were vintage European heirlooms, passed down from her late husband's wealthy ancestors. She walked into one of the most exclusive estate jewelers in the Gold Coast district, slapped the velvet box on the glass display counter, and demanded a premium cash advance. The jeweler, a seasoned professional with decades of experience, pulled out his magnifying loupe and carefully examined the pieces. It did not take him long to deliver the crushing verdict. The stones were high-grade cubic zirconia. The metal was not platinum, but rhodium-plated brass. The entire set was a cheap fabricated replica. Brenda's late husband had not left her priceless European heirlooms. He had bought her department store costume jewelry, and she had spent decades parading it around as if it belonged in a museum. The jeweler politely declined to offer her a single cent, sending her storming out of the boutique in absolute mortification. Completely humiliated and running out of time, Brenda was forced to drive to a rundown pawn shop on the industrial outskirts of the city. She pawned her television, her designer handbags, and even her expensive kitchen appliances just to scrape together enough cash for the bail bondsman. By the time she finally arrived at the Central Police Precinct late that afternoon, she looked like a woman who had just survived a shipwreck. Bradley was finally released just as the sun began to set over the city. He walked through the heavy metal doors of the precinct wearing the exact same wrinkled clothes he had been arrested in the night before. He looked completely exhausted, but his signature arrogance was still desperately clinging to him. He saw his mother waiting by her cheap rental car and immediately began complaining about the terrible food in the holding cell, loudly declaring that he was going to sue my apartment building for false imprisonment. He truly thought the worst of his ordeal was over. He thought he was walking out into freedom to regroup, secure his crypto millions, and launch a new attack against me. He was entirely wrong. Because I knew exactly when and where he was going to be released. Before Bradley could even reach the passenger door of Brenda's rental car, a sharply dressed man in a gray suit stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. "Bradley," the man asked, holding a thick manila envelope. Bradley stopped puffing out his chest. "Yes, who is asking?" The man did not introduce himself. He simply thrust the thick envelope directly into Bradley's chest, forcing him to grab it on reflex. "You have been served," the man stated clearly, turning on his heel and walking away without another word. Bradley stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping around him as he tore open the envelope. It was not a lawsuit from the apartment building. It was a comprehensive, ironclad petition for the dissolution of our marriage. My attorney had moved with absolute precision. The document legally severed every financial tie between us. It outlined the exact timeline of his $50,000 theft, formally categorizing it as marital asset dissipation. It demanded the immediate return of the funds and explicitly stated that I was seeking full legal protection from his impending federal tax audit. Bradley stared at the paperwork, his hands physically shaking. He had no money, no car, and a looming eviction. His crypto savior was a total fraud. His mother was pawning household appliances to survive, and now he was officially facing a ruthless divorce battle completely unshielded. The panic finally broke through his delusion, but it was far too late to stop the momentum of his own destruction. The panic finally broke through his delusion, but it was far too late to stop the momentum of his own destruction. Standing on the cold sidewalk outside the police precinct, clutching the heavy manila envelope containing our divorce petition, Bradley realized he was completely cornered. The legal document in his hands was not just a request to end a marriage. It was a forensic masterpiece. My attorney had laid out every single detail of his $50,000 theft, attaching the exact transaction logs and highlighting his liability. Bradley had $0 to his name, no legal representation, and an eviction notice ticking down by the hour. He desperately needed a lifeline. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed Jamal. It went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. What Bradley did not know was that Jamal was currently facing his own absolute apocalypse. The federal freeze on Jamal's accounts was not a temporary administrative glitch, and the authorities were moving aggressively. Federal investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission had formally subpoenaed his business records. Faced with the terrifying reality of federal prison, Jamal did exactly what a cowardly opportunist always does. He looked for a fall guy. Jamal had hired a sleazy criminal defense attorney and immediately began spinning a fabricated narrative. He told his lawyer that he was just a low-level broker and that the real mastermind behind the fraudulent liquidity pools was actually his brother-in-law, Bradley. Jamal claimed that Bradley had orchestrated the illegal offshore transfers, citing the $50,000 wire from my joint account as direct evidence of Bradley's operational control. Jamal was attempting to hand Bradley over to the federal government on a silver platter in exchange for a plea deal. However, Jamal made a critical error in his panicked strategy. He conducted this phone call with his defense attorney in his own home, completely ignoring the fact that his wife Stephanie had just returned from her coffee meeting with me. Stephanie was already shattered by the undeniable proof I had shown her regarding the luxury watches Jamal bought for another woman. Walking into her hallway, she overheard every single word her husband said. She listened as Jamal threw her own brother under the bus to save his own skin. Stephanie did not confront Jamal. She was too disgusted and enraged. Instead, she quietly pulled out her phone and sent a massive paragraph to Bradley detailing exactly what Jamal had just done. She warned her brother that Jamal was pinning the entire cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme on him and had already given his name to federal investigators. Bradley received that text message while he was sitting in the passenger seat of Brenda's rental car pulling into the driveway of the house they were about to be evicted from. The message hit him like a physical blow. He had idolized Jamal. He had stolen my savings to impress him, and now Jamal was framing him for a massive federal crime. Pure blinding rage took over. As Brenda parked the car, Bradley kicked his door open and stormed across the front lawn. Coincidentally, Jamal had just arrived at the house in his leased BMW to try and calm Brenda down about the bail money situation, completely unaware that Stephanie had just blown his cover. Jamal stepped out of his car wearing his signature expensive suit and a fake reassuring smile. Before Jamal could even say a word, Bradley charged across the manicured grass. He did not ask for an explanation. He grabbed Jamal by the lapels of his tailored jacket and shoved him violently against the side of the BMW. "You told the federal agents I was the mastermind!" Bradley screamed, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. "You stole my money! You bought watches for your mistress, and now you are trying to send me to federal prison!" Jamal's eyes widened in panic, but his massive ego refused to let him back down. He shoved Bradley away, his voice rising defensive and arrogant. "Get off me, you unemployed loser. You wired the money. Your name is on the bank transfer. You are going down for this, not me." That was the breaking point. Bradley threw a wild, desperate punch that connected squarely with Jamal's jaw. Jamal stumbled backward, recovered, and tackled Bradley to the ground. The two grown men began brutally wrestling on the front lawn, tearing up the grass and shouting obscenities. Brenda ran out of the house, screaming hysterically for them to stop, but they completely ignored her. The suburban neighborhood, usually quiet and pristine, was treated to a spectacular show of pure chaos. It did not take long for the neighbors, who had already read Brenda's dramatic online posts about being a helpless victim, to pull out their phones and dial 911. Less than 24 hours after being released from a downtown holding cell, Bradley was once again bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of approaching police cruisers. I received the news of Bradley's second arrest the following morning. My divorce attorney, a sharp and incredibly efficient man named Daniel, called me while I was reviewing a corporate ledger at my desk. Daniel had pulled the public police logs as part of his routine monitoring of my estranged husband. He calmly informed me that Bradley had been booked on charges of assault and battery, creating a public disturbance right on his mother's front lawn. But that was not the primary reason Daniel was calling me. The physical altercation with Jamal was just a pathetic sideshow, a desperate reaction of two cornered men turning on each other. The real disaster, Daniel explained, was a notification he had received from a major national bank just an hour prior. Naomi Daniels said, his voice carrying the serious weight of a seasoned litigator. "We have a highly significant development. I just received a flagged alert from the premium credit monitoring service we placed on your Social Security number. Bradley attempted to open a $50,000 unsecured line of credit late last night. He did it online right after he bailed himself out of jail and right before he assaulted his brother-in-law." I stopped typing. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my professional curiosity instantly piqued. Did he use his own credentials? I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Daniel replied. "He applied using his name as the primary borrower, but he listed you as the sole financial guarantor. He submitted your personal income history, your corporate employment details, and your full Social Security number. The application included a digitally signed authorization form. He forged your electronic signature to secure the loan." I sat perfectly still for a moment, letting the sheer magnitude of his stupidity wash over me. Bradley was desperate. He was facing an imminent eviction, a ruthless divorce, a frozen bank account, and a pending federal tax audit. He needed cash to hire a lawyer and save his mother from impending homelessness. In his panicked, entitled mind, he thought he could just drag my name onto a loan application and force me to pay the massive bill later. He thought it was just another clever shortcut, just like the tax return he had falsified months ago. Daniel continued. "The bank's automated underwriting system immediately flagged the application because we placed a hard security freeze on your credit profile 2 days ago. The loan was automatically denied, but the fraudulent application is now permanently recorded in their mainframe. I need your authorization to draft a sworn affidavit stating you did not sign those documents. We can use this as ultimate leverage in the divorce settlement. We can force him to walk away with absolutely nothing and waive any right to spousal support." I looked out the window of my office, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I did not want leverage for a civil divorce settlement. I wanted complete and absolute destruction of his ability to ever harm me again. Daniel, I said, my voice perfectly calm and collected. We are not going to use this as leverage in family court. There was a brief pause on the line. What exactly do you want to do, Naomi? I am a forensic accountant. Daniel, I know federal banking regulations better than I know my own birthday. When Bradley sat at his computer and hit submit on a fraudulent credit application across state lines using a forged digital signature, he did not just commit a marital indiscretion. He committed identity theft, bank fraud, and federal wire fraud. If we use it as leverage, it stays a messy civil matter. If we report it directly to the bank's fraud division and the federal authorities, it becomes a criminal indictment. I heard Daniel softly exhale on the other end of the phone. You want to hand him over for federal prosecution. I want him to experience the exact unfiltered consequences of his own actions, I corrected. He sent me a text message demanding distance. I am simply ensuring that the distance is legally mandated by a federal judge. Do not draft a settlement offer. Draft a formal criminal referral. Send all the flagged application data directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrime Division and the bank's internal fraud investigators. Understood. Daniel replied, the professional respect evident in his tone. I will have the referral filed before noon. I ended the call and placed my phone back on the desk. My smile remained. Bradley had spent our entire marriage trying to make me feel small, boring, and insignificant. He thought I was just a human calculator he could manipulate and discard at his convenience. Instead, he had handed the human calculator the exact mathematical formula needed to lock him in a cage. The Civil War was over. The federal prosecution was about to begin, and he had completely orchestrated it himself. The Civil War was over. The federal prosecution was about to begin, and he had completely orchestrated it himself. However, a cornered animal will always thrash blindly before it finally gives up. I expected a counterattack. I just did not expect it to be so profoundly ignorant. Later that same evening, I was sitting on my balcony watching the city lights flicker when my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed Brenda's name. I had not blocked her yet, because in forensic investigations, it is always best to let the suspect keep talking. I answered the call and placed it on speakerphone, resting the device on the glass patio table. Hello, Brenda, I said casually. You thought you were so smart, Naomi, Brenda hissed. Her voice was trembling, but she was trying desperately to mask her panic with a tone of victorious malice. You thought you could just evict me, throw my son in jail, and walk away with all the money. But you made a massive mistake. You left something behind when you packed your bags. I took a sip of my sparkling water. Is that so? What did I leave behind? Your old silver laptop, Brenda announced triumphantly. The one you used to keep in the hall closet. I knew you were hiding things from us. I took it to a local computer repair shop this morning and paid a technician to bypass your little password. I raised an eyebrow. The laptop she was referring to was a decommissioned machine I had not used for active work in over 2 years. You should be very scared right now, Brenda continued, her confidence swelling. We opened the hard drive. We found your hidden folders, the ones labeled confidential client offshore ledgers and high net worth tax bypass structures. We have all the social security numbers, the private banking details, and the corporate secrets of your precious accounting firm. I had to cover the microphone with my hand for a brief second to suppress a genuine laugh. Brenda had absolutely no idea how high-level corporate cybersecurity actually functioned. Financial firms do not just leave sensitive offshore client data on decommissioned hardware in a suburban closet. The files she was looking at were what the cybersecurity industry calls a honeypot. A honeypot is a decoy system. It is filled with entirely fabricated data, fake social security numbers, and dummy financial ledgers designed specifically to look like a gold mine to hackers. The moment unauthorized access is gained, and those specific files are opened, the system silently triggers an alert and logs the IP address of the intruder. Brenda had not discovered my corporate secrets. She had just tripped a digital burglar alarm. But I was not about to tell her that. I needed her to fully commit to her crime. Brenda, you cannot access those files, I said, deliberately injecting a note of forced panic into my voice. That is highly classified corporate data. If you expose that, it will ruin my career. That is exactly the point, Brenda sneered, savoring every second of her perceived victory. Now you are finally listening. Here is how this is going to work. You are going to call your property manager right now and cancel the eviction. Then, you are going to call your lawyer and drop the divorce petition. You are going to sign the deed of this house over to Bradley, and you are going to give him the $50,000 you owe him. And if I refuse, I asked, keeping my voice shaky. Then I send the entire hard drive to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the local news stations, and the managing director of your firm, Brenda threatened. I will tell them you have been illegally hiding client money offshore. You will lose your license, your job, and probably go to prison. The choice is yours, Naomi. I paced the balcony, pretending to be trapped. Brenda, I cannot just do all of that based on a phone call. How do I know you will not just release the data anyway? I need to know exactly what you want. I need your demands clearly outlined so my lawyer can draft the property transfer agreements properly. Send me an email. Detail exactly what you are demanding in exchange for the laptop and your silence. If I see it in writing, I will know you are serious, and we can make the deal. Brenda laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Fine. I will email you the exact terms right now. You have until tomorrow morning to comply, or I destroy your life. The line went dead. I picked up my phone, my fake panic instantly vanishing, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I opened my email inbox and waited. 2 minutes later, a new message arrived from Brenda's personal email account. The subject line read, "The terms." She had meticulously typed out her exact threats to expose the data unless I handed over the house and the cash. Brenda thought she had just executed a brilliant blackmail scheme. In reality, she had just documented her own federal felony. By transmitting a threat to expose sensitive information in exchange for financial gain in real estate across an electronic communication network, Brenda had committed the textbook definition of federal extortion. She had voluntarily handed me the final piece of the puzzle, wrapping her own prison sentence in a neat digital bow. I did not just take a simple screenshot of her email on my phone. In the world of forensic accounting and federal law, screenshots can be easily manipulated by defense attorneys and are often heavily scrutinized in a courtroom. Instead, I opened my laptop and exported the entire email message as a raw data file. This preserved the digital signature, the server routing headers, and the exact IP address from which it was sent. This ensured that the evidence of her crime was completely forensically bulletproof. I opened a secure communication channel. Because of my seniority in the financial investigation field, I frequently collaborated with federal law enforcement on massive corporate embezzlement cases. I had the direct contact information for a special agent in the Chicago field office of the FBI. I drafted a highly professional referral. I attached Brenda's email file, a summary of her physical address, and a brief note explaining that my estranged mother-in-law was actively attempting to extort me using what she believed was highly classified corporate financial data. To ensure nothing slipped through the cracks, I also attached the documentation of Bradley's forged loan application from the previous night. I bundled their individual crimes together into one massive, undeniable federal package. I copied my divorce attorney Daniel on the correspondence. The trap was officially armed. The federal authorities now had a documented, time-stamped extortion demand sitting right in their inbox. Within 10 minutes, Daniel replied to my email with a single word. Brilliant. Now I needed to orchestrate the grand finale. I needed all of them gathered in one room. I needed them completely relaxed, entirely convinced of their own victory, and totally unprepared for the legal avalanche that was about to bury them. I glanced at the digital calendar on my desk. It was Tuesday. Thanksgiving was exactly 2 days away. Brenda absolutely loved Thanksgiving. It was her favorite time of the year to play the wealthy, gracious hostess, serving an oversized turkey on expensive china she could no longer afford to her extended family. It was the absolute perfect stage for what I had planned. Before reaching out to my husband, I made a quick phone call to Diane, the property manager at Sterling Property Management. I asked for a status update on the 3-day notice to pay or quit that had been taped to Brenda's door. Diane confirmed that the payment deadline would officially expire on Thanksgiving morning. Because of the holiday, she had already coordinated a special arrangement with the county sheriff's department. The eviction deputies were scheduled to arrive at the property at exactly 6 in the evening on Thursday to execute a hard lockout. The timing was absolutely flawless. I picked up my cell phone and opened my text message thread with Bradley. I had not spoken directly to him since he was arrested in my apartment lobby. I needed to play the role of the terrified, defeated wife who had finally realized she was completely outmatched by his mother's brilliant blackmail scheme. I typed slowly and deliberately. Bradley, your mother contacted me. I do not want this to escalate any further, and I absolutely cannot risk my professional license or my corporate career. Let us meet at your mother's house for Thanksgiving dinner to discuss a final settlement. I will bring the property deed and the financial transfer paperwork for the $50,000. We can end this quietly. I hit send. I did not have to wait long for a response. Less than 3 minutes later, a reply popped up on my screen. Bradley could never resist an opportunity to gloat. I knew you would finally see reason. Naomi, his message read. You played a stupid game and you lost. Be there at 4 in the afternoon. Do not be late and make sure you bring a pen. Jamal is going to review the contracts before you sign anything. I laughed out loud in the quiet of my luxury apartment. Jamal is going to review the contracts. The irony was absolutely exquisite. The man who was currently under federal investigation for running a massive cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme and who had just engaged in a fistfight on the front lawn was going to act as their legal counsel. It was a spectacular display of blind, staggering arrogance. They genuinely believed they had won. Brenda thought she was a master blackmailer. Bradley thought he had reclaimed his stolen power. Jamal thought he was a strategic genius who had successfully manipulated everyone. They were going to spend the next 48 hours celebrating. They were going to roast a turkey, pour expensive wine, and toast to my complete surrender. They had no idea that the house they were sitting in was scheduled for an immediate sheriff eviction. They had no idea that federal agents were reviewing their emails. I walked into my closet to select my outfit for Thursday. I chose a stunning crimson dress and a sharp black blazer. I was not going as a submissive wife. I was going as the executioner, and I was going to make sure they remembered this Thanksgiving for the rest of their miserable lives. While I spent Wednesday finalizing the legal documents with my attorney Bradley and Jamal, were busy doing what they did best. They were celebrating a victory they had not actually earned. Despite their violent fistfight on Brenda's front lawn just 24 hours prior, the two men had miraculously reconciled. Greed is a powerful bonding agent. The promise of my supposed $50,000 surrender and the transfer of the property deed had magically erased all of their animosity. They were suddenly a united front again, bonded by their shared delusion that they had successfully outsmarted a senior forensic accountant. On Wednesday night, Bradley and Jamal went out to a local sports bar to celebrate their impending wealth. I knew this because Bradley could not resist bragging on his social media accounts. He posted a photo of himself and Jamal holding up expensive glasses of imported whiskey. The caption read, "Closing massive real estate deals tomorrow. Never let anyone tell you what you are worth." It was a pathetic display of unearned arrogance. Bradley genuinely believed he was about to become a property owner and walk away with a massive cash settlement. He thought he had blackmailed me into absolute submission. Jamal, however, was playing an entirely different and dangerous game. He was raising his glass and smiling for Bradley's camera, but his eyes were calculating and desperate. Jamal knew the federal investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission were closing in on his fraudulent cryptocurrency platform. He knew his bank accounts were frozen and his domestic financial life was entirely over. He had no intention of using the $50,000 settlement to hire defense attorneys or pay back the people he had scammed. Jamal had a much darker, much more selfish exit strategy mapped out in his devious head. Jamal needed liquid cash to run. He planned to take whatever portion of the settlement money he could extract from Bradley on Thanksgiving Day, convert it immediately into an untraceable digital currency wallet, and vanish without a trace. He had set his sights on Dubai. It is a wealthy jurisdiction known for being incredibly difficult when it comes to international financial extradition treaties. He was going to leave his massive legal disaster far behind him, and more importantly, he was going to completely abandon his wife to deal with the federal fallout all by herself. The full depth of Jamal's betrayal was discovered later that same night by Stephanie. After Jamal returned from the sports bar, smelling of whiskey and cheap cigars, he passed out fully clothed on their bed. Stephanie was still awake, her mind racing with anxiety over the federal investigation and the undeniable proof I had shown her regarding his infidelity. She noticed Jamal's heavy leather briefcase sitting near the bedroom door. He usually guarded that briefcase with his life, but the strong alcohol had made him incredibly careless. She saw an opportunity to finally uncover his actual plans. Driven by a mix of fear and desperate suspicion, Stephanie quietly knelt on the floor and unzipped the main compartment of the leather bag. She bypassed his business folders and reached into a hidden zippered pocket at the very bottom. Her fingers brushed against a thick, stiff booklet. She pulled it out and held it up to the dim light of the bedroom. It was Jamal's passport. Tucked neatly inside the pages was a printed boarding pass. Stephanie felt the air leave her lungs as she read the destination and the departure time printed on the ticket. It was a one-way first-class flight to Dubai, scheduled to depart at midnight on Thursday, just hours after our Thanksgiving dinner. Beneath the passport, she found a thick stack of newly withdrawn $100 bills and a small encrypted hardware wallet used for storing untraceable cryptocurrency. It was a perfectly packed escape kit. Jamal was not planning to fight the federal charges. He was not planning to save their marriage. He was planning to take the money from my fake settlement, head straight to the airport, and leave her behind forever. Stephanie sat on the bedroom floor, clutching the passport to her chest. A wave of absolute terror washed over her. She knew she should wake him up. She knew she should scream and demand answers. But she was completely paralyzed by fear. If she confronted him now, he might leave immediately. She carefully placed the passport and the ticket back into the hidden pocket, zipped the briefcase shut, and crawled into bed, next to the man who was actively planning to abandon her. She stayed completely silent, terrified, desperately, hoping tomorrow's family Thanksgiving dinner would miraculously save them, entirely unaware it was going to be their absolute final execution. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp, freezing wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. While millions of families across the country were busy basting turkeys and arguing over football games, I was sitting in my silent, sunlit apartment, drinking black coffee and reviewing my arsenal. I felt absolutely no holiday spirit. I only felt the cold, precise anticipation of a professional auditor about to close a massive career-defining case. I was not preparing to celebrate. I was preparing to dismantle a criminal enterprise masquerading as my family. I walked over to my dining table, which I had temporarily converted into a legal staging area. I opened my hard-shell leather briefcase. This briefcase usually carried corporate balance sheets and quarterly projections. Today, it was carrying pure, unadulterated financial destruction. First, I carefully packed a thick, professionally bound copy of the forensic audit I had compiled regarding Jamal's fake cryptocurrency platform and Bradley's stolen funds. It detailed every single fraudulent transaction, highlighting the Miami watch purchases and the international tumbling attempts. Next, I slid in the stamped certified copies of the injured spouse allocation and the federal tax fraud report I had filed with the Internal Revenue Service against my husband. Right behind that went a printed transcript of Brenda's extortion email, along with the confirmation receipt from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrime Division. Finally, I tucked a crisp manila envelope into the interior pocket. It contained the final divorce settlement papers, heavily revised by my attorney Daniel. These papers did not offer Bradley a single penny. They simply outlined his massive debt and absolute legal surrender. I closed the briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. The satisfying click echoed through the empty apartment. I picked up my phone and dialed Diane at the property management company. "Good morning, Diane," I said smoothly. "I just wanted to confirm the schedule for this evening." "Good morning, Naomi," Diane replied, her voice brisk and professional. "Everything is set. The county sheriff's eviction unit has the 3-day notice on file. The grace period officially expired at midnight. The deputies are scheduled to arrive at the property at exactly 6 o'clock to execute the lockout. They will be accompanied by a locksmith to immediately secure the premises." "Thank you, Diane," I said. "I will see you there." I ended the call and walked into my bedroom to prepare myself physically for the confrontation. For 4 years, I had deliberately minimized my appearance whenever I attended Brenda's family gatherings. I wore muted colors, sensible flats, and pulled my hair back into a tight, unthreatening bun. I had done everything in my power to blend into the background, desperately trying to avoid triggering Brenda's aggressive insecurities or overshadowing Bradley's fragile ego. I had played the role of the dull, submissive accountant perfectly. That role was officially retired. I unzipped a garment bag hanging on the back of my door. Earlier that week, I had visited an exclusive boutique downtown and purchased an outfit that projected absolute authority. I slipped into a stunning form-fitting crimson dress that commanded attention. Over it, I wore a sharply tailored black blazer with structured shoulders, the kind of jacket a chief executive officer wears to a hostile corporate takeover. I stepped into a pair of black leather stilettos that echoed loudly on the hardwood floor. I left my hair down, falling in loose, confident waves, and applied a bold, dark red lipstick. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. She was not a human automated teller machine, and she was certainly not someone to be blackmailed. She was a weapon. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I grabbed my keys, picked up my heavy briefcase, and took the elevator down to the secure parking garage. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the leather interior cold against my coat. I mapped the route to the suburban house I owned. The drive would take exactly 45 minutes. That meant I would arrive precisely at 4:15. I wanted to let them sit and stew for 15 minutes, allowing their arrogant anticipation to build before I walked through the door. I merged onto the busy interstate highway, the dark gray afternoon sky actively threatening heavy snow. I thought about Brenda currently basting a turkey in a kitchen she was about to be forcefully removed from. I thought about Bradley eagerly waiting to sign a fake settlement that would fund his delusions. And I thought about Jamal nervously checking his secret Dubai plane ticket, completely oblivious to the federal agents already monitoring his every move. The calm before the storm was incredibly peaceful, but I knew the moment I turned the brass knob of that front door, the hurricane was going to tear their entire world to shreds. The hurricane was going to tear their entire world to shreds. I pulled onto the familiar suburban street exactly at 4:15 in the afternoon. The neighborhood was lined with vehicles belonging to various extended family members, people who had spent the last 3 days leaving vile comments on my social media profiles based on Brenda's fabricated sob story. I parked my car directly behind Jamal's leased BMW, grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, and stepped out into the biting cold. My stiletto heels clicked sharply against the concrete walkway. I did not bother to knock. I reached out, turned the brass handle, and pushed the front door open. The sheer volume of the chatter inside the house immediately dropped to a dead silence. The entryway opened directly into the formal dining room, and the scene before me was a masterpiece of desperate theatricality. Brenda had pulled out all the stops to project the illusion of unbothered wealth. The long dining table was covered in a crisp white linen cloth set with her remaining good china and crystal wine glasses. A massive roasted turkey sat in the center surrounded by silver platters of expensive catered side dishes. It was a lavish display, funded by total desperation, likely purchased on yet another high-interest credit card she could never repay. Brenda stood at the head of the table, wearing a brightly colored silk dress. When she saw me, her face broke into a massive, predatory smile. She looked around at the extended family members seated at the table, her audience of enablers, before turning her gaze back to me. "Naomi, darling." Brenda purred, her voice dripping with fake, condescending sweetness. "We were beginning to wonder if you were going to show up. Please come in. We saved you a seat right next to my son." I walked slowly into the room. I could feel the hostile stares of Bradley's aunts, uncles, and cousins burning into me. They looked at my crimson dress and tailored black blazer with visible distaste, completely offended that I had not arrived in sweatpants with my head bowed in shame. I did not break eye contact with Brenda. I walked past the whispering relatives and stood directly behind the empty chair next to Bradley. Bradley looked incredibly smug. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of red wine, acting as if he had single-handedly conquered a nation. Across the table, Jamal sat stiffly in his tailored suit. He was trying to project his usual arrogant confidence, but his eyes were darting nervously toward the front window. He was a man watching the clock, waiting for the exact moment he could grab his hidden passport and flee to the airport. Next to him, Stephanie stared down at her empty plate, looking absolutely nauseous. She knew her husband was planning to abandon her, and she was entirely paralyzed by the impending disaster. "Sit down." Naomi Bradley ordered, his voice attempting a deep, authoritative register that only made him sound ridiculous. "We do not need to ruin Thanksgiving dinner with unnecessary drama. Let us just get the business out of the way so my family can eat in peace." I remained standing. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the pristine white tablecloth right next to his wineglass. Bradley sighed heavily, playing directly to his audience. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a stapled stack of papers. He aggressively slapped the document down on the table and slid it across the smooth linen directly in front of me. "This is the final settlement agreement," Bradley announced loudly, ensuring every relative in the room could hear his supposed victory. "My brother-in-law, Jamal, drafted it this morning. It is completely straightforward. You sign the deed of this house over to me today. You formally authorize the transfer of the $50,000 into my personal checking account to cover my business losses. In exchange, my mother will completely destroy the hard drive containing your illegal offshore corporate files, and we will agree not to press federal charges against you." Jamal cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. "It is an ironclad contract, Naomi. I highly suggest you sign it right now. You are completely out of leverage, and we hold all the cards. Refusing to sign will result in the immediate public release of your confidential client data to the authorities." The extended family murmured in agreement, looking at me with absolute contempt. They actually believed I was a criminal mastermind, being graciously allowed to buy my freedom. They thought I was entirely trapped. I looked down at the predatory contract. It was riddled with spelling errors and legally unenforceable clauses. It was a child's idea of a legal document. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my expensive silver fountain pen. The room held its collective breath. Brenda's eyes were wide with triumphant anticipation. Bradley leaned forward, his hand hovering near the paper, ready to snatch it the second I finished. I uncapped the pen. The silver metal glinted under the dining room chandelier. I brought the tip of the pen down until it was hovering a fraction of an inch above the signature line. Everyone watched my hand. I held it there for 5 agonizing seconds. Then I slowly looked up, locked eyes with Bradley, and smiled. I did not sign the paper. I placed the pen down on the table and rested my hand on the brass locks of my briefcase. I did not sign the paper. I placed the pen down on the table and rested my hand on the brass locks of my briefcase. With a sharp motion, I flicked both latches upward. The sound snapped through the tense silence of the dining room. I opened the heavy leather lid. Bradley let out an exasperated sigh, assuming I was dragging out the inevitable surrender. He reached his hand forward, expecting me to pull out a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a thick stack of professionally bound, glossy documents. I took the first copy and slid it across the white linen tablecloth to his Aunt Catherine. I slid the next copy to his Uncle Robert. I dealt the heavy folders down the table like a dealer at a high-stakes casino. "What is this?" Catherine asked, squinting at the bold lettering on the cover. Bradley looked down at the copy in front of Jamal. His arrogant smile vanished. These were not property transfer deeds. They were comprehensive financial dossiers. I closed my briefcase and stood up tall, projecting my voice over the confused family members. "I promise to bring a final settlement," I announced. "And as a senior forensic accountant, my version of a settlement is absolute transparency. You spent the last 3 days leaving abusive comments on my social media pages because you believed Brenda was a helpless victim. I suggest you open those folders to page 3 and see exactly who the real victims are." Robert opened his folder. His eyes scanned the highlighted column. Within seconds, his face drained of all color. He looked up at Brenda, his voice trembling with shock and anger. "Brenda, what is the Education Trust account?" Brenda froze. Her hand started shaking, rattling the crystal wine glass she was holding. I answered for her. "That is the joint college fund the extended family contributed to for the last decade," I explained calmly. "You thought your money was safely accruing interest for your grandchildren. But as the audit shows, Brenda drained that account 4 years ago to pay off massive credit card debt before her original house went into foreclosure. She stole your money to buy designer clothes and fund her country club membership." The dining room exploded. Catherine gasped, dropping the folder. Robert stood up his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "You stole from our grandchildren!" he roared, pointing a shaking finger at Brenda. She tried to stammer an excuse, her face burning a humiliating red, but she was completely drowned out by the sudden onslaught of angry voices from her own relatives. The grand illusion she spent decades building was entirely decimated in less than 60 seconds. They were no longer looking at a wealthy, wronged matriarch. They were looking at a common thief. But I was not finished. I raised my hand, demanding silence. The room slowly quieted down, all eyes fixed on me with fear and newfound respect. "Now I suggest you turn to page 12, I instructed. The family members hurriedly flipped through the pages. That section details the brilliant cryptocurrency investments managed by Jamal. Several people at this table handed him thousands of dollars over the past year, believing his promises of guaranteed returns. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting toward the front door. He was suddenly sweating through his expensive tailored suit. "As you will see on the verified transaction logs," I continued, "Jamal never invested a single dime of your money into any decentralized liquidity pools. He routed your funds directly into his personal checking accounts. He used your hard-earned savings to lease luxury vehicles and purchase solid gold watches for a woman who is not my sister-in-law." A collective gasp echoed around the table. Stephanie squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear rolling down her cheek, validating the horrible truth she kept hidden since the morning. Furthermore, I added, raising my voice to cut through the rising chaos, "Jamal is not reviewing any contracts today because his accounts are currently frozen by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he is under active federal investigation for running a Ponzi scheme." The Thanksgiving dinner instantly devolved into an absolute riot. Robert lunged across the table toward Jamal, knocking over a crystal pitcher. Bradley's cousins started shouting, demanding their money back immediately. Brenda was backed against the dining room wall, crying hysterically as her sisters screamed at her for stealing their money. Bradley sat frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction happening around him. He brought me here to sign a predatory contract and humiliate me in front of his family. Instead, I had just successfully weaponized the cold, absolute truth, permanently turning his entire toxic, incredibly greedy family against each other forever. The shouting reached a fever pitch. Uncle Robert was demanding his money back while Aunt Catherine was practically in tears over the stolen college fund. Brenda was backed against the wall, her perfect hostess facade completely shattered. She looked around at the furious faces of her own siblings, realizing that her decades of manipulation had just been incinerated in front of her eyes. Panic set in quickly, followed by the vicious, cornered anger of a narcissist losing control. Brenda grabbed a heavy crystal water pitcher and slammed it down onto the dining table. The loud crack of the glass against the wood silenced the room for a fraction of a second. "Shut up!" Brenda shrieked, her face contorted with rage, pointing a manicured finger directly at me. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin my family? You think you hold all the power because of some printed spreadsheets? I still have your laptop, Naomi. I have every single illegal offshore file you tried to hide. I have the email drafted to the authorities right now on my phone. If you do not drop this and sign that house over to me this exact second I am hitting send, you will be the one going to federal prison, not us." She pulled her smartphone out of her pocket, waving it in the air like a detonator. The extended family gasped, looking back and forth between us, unsure of who was actually holding the ultimate weapon. Bradley suddenly looked hopeful again, believing his mother's blackmail was going to save them at the very last second. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Brenda. I simply smiled a cold, genuine smile that made Bradley's momentary hope vanish instantly. "I am incredibly glad you brought up the laptop, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the tension with absolute clarity, "because I actually did not come here alone today." I turned my head slightly toward the front entryway. I had purposely left the heavy oak door resting slightly ajar when I walked in. From the shadows of the foyer, a tall man in a dark tailored suit stepped into the bright light of the dining room. He had been standing there quietly for the last 10 minutes, listening to every single word of the confrontation. The man walked purposefully to the head of the table. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and flipped it open. A heavy gold shield caught the light of the chandelier. "Good evening," the man said, his voice carrying the unmistakable flat authority of federal law enforcement. "I am Special Agent Reynolds with the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I strongly suggest you put that phone down immediately, ma'am." Brenda froze. Her arm hovered in the air, the smartphone suddenly looking like a live grenade in her hand. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint. The angry relatives took several huge steps back, putting as much distance between themselves and Brenda as physically possible. "The laptop you took to a local repair shop," Agent Reynolds explained, his eyes fixed dead on Brenda, "did not contain confidential client data. It contained a cybersecurity honeypot. It was a decoy system filled with fabricated numbers designed specifically to flag unauthorized access. The moment you opened those files, you tripped a digital alarm that logged your exact location." Brenda lowered her arm, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. "Furthermore, Reynolds continued stepping closer to the table when you sent an email to Naomi demanding real estate and $50,000 in exchange for your silence. You crossed a massive legal line. Transmitting a threat to expose sensitive information across an electronic communication network for financial gain is a direct violation of Title 18 of the United States Code. You did not uncover a corporate conspiracy, Brenda. You documented your own federal extortion." "No," Brenda whispered, her voice cracking in absolute terror. "No, it was a misunderstanding. It was just a family dispute. I was just trying to protect my son." Federal extortion carries a maximum penalty of up to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Reynolds stated, completely ignoring her pathetic excuse. "We have the time-stamped email, the server routing data, and your verbal confirmation of the threat just 2 minutes ago in front of 12 witnesses." Bradley slumped down in his dining chair, burying his face in his hands. The predatory contract he had proudly slid across the table now sat uselessly next to my untouched silver pen. His mother had not outsmarted me. She had literally invited a federal agent to her Thanksgiving dinner and confessed to a felony right in front of him. The ultimate extortion backfire was complete, and the sheer terror radiating from Brenda was the most satisfying holiday feast I could have ever asked for. The ultimate extortion backfire was complete, and the sheer terror radiating from Brenda was the most satisfying holiday feast I could have ever asked for. The entire dining room was absolutely paralyzed. Uncle Robert and Aunt Catherine were staring at Brenda with open disgust. Bradley was hyperventilating into his hands. Agent Reynolds stood at the head of the table, an imposing figure of federal authority, completely commanding the attention of every single person in the house. Well, almost every single person. While everyone else was fixated on Brenda and her impending federal prison sentence, I kept my eyes on the far side of the table. Jamal was a seasoned opportunist. He recognized a sinking ship the second it started taking on water. With the FBI agent focused entirely on his mother-in-law, Jamal saw his narrow window of opportunity. Very slowly, he pushed his dining chair back. The plush carpet muffled the sound of the wooden legs. He reached down and grabbed the handle of his heavy leather briefcase, the one containing his encrypted hardware wallet. He stood up, keeping his head down, and began to slowly inch his way backward toward the arched doorway that led to the kitchen and the back patio door. He was going to make a run for it. He planned to slip out through the backyard, jump the fence, and disappear into the suburban night before anyone even noticed he was gone. He took one step into the hallway, his hand already reaching for the kitchen light switch. He did not make it a second step. A figure stepped directly into the center of the archway, physically blocking his path. It was Stephanie. My sister-in-law had been sitting in absolute nauseated silence for the entire afternoon. She had watched her mother be exposed as a thief. She had watched her brother face total ruin, and she had watched her husband try to quietly abandon her in the middle of a federal raid. "Where exactly are you going, Jamal?" Stephanie asked. Her voice was not loud, but the icy, trembling rage in it cut through the room like a razor blade. Jamal froze, his fake smile instantly returning as he tried to manage his wife. "Step aside, Steph," he whispered urgently, his eyes darting back toward the dining room to see if Agent Reynolds had noticed them. "I am just going to the car to make a quick phone call to my lawyer. I will be right back. We are going to fix this." "You are not going to the car," Stephanie replied, her voice growing stronger, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. "And you are certainly not going to fix this. You are going to the airport." Jamal's face drained of color. He tried to push past her, but she firmly planted her hands on his chest and shoved him backward into the dining room. He stumbled, nearly dropping his heavy briefcase. Agent Reynolds turned his attention away from Brenda and focused his sharp gaze on the couple. Stephanie reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Last night, terrified and alone in the dark, she had been too scared to confront him. But seeing the absolute destruction he had caused, and realizing he was about to leave her, holding the bag for his massive federal crimes, she finally found her courage. She pulled her hand out of her pocket and held up a thick, dark blue booklet. It was Jamal's passport. Tucked inside the pages was the printed boarding pass she had confiscated from his hidden compartment while he was sleeping. "He is trying to flee the country," Stephanie announced loudly, holding the documents up for the federal agent to see. "He booked a one-way first-class ticket to Dubai, departing at midnight tonight. He packed his bag with cash and an encrypted digital wallet. He was going to leave me here to take the fall for his cryptocurrency scam." Jamal lunged forward, trying to snatch the passport from her hand, but Agent Reynolds moved with lightning speed. The federal agent intercepted Jamal, grabbing him by the shoulder and spinning him around. Reynolds shoved Jamal face first against the nearest wall, effectively neutralizing the threat. "You have terrible timing, Jamal," Agent Reynolds said, his voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative register. "And you are an incredibly severe flight risk." Reynolds pulled a small two-way radio from his belt and spoke a brief command. Less than 10 seconds later, The front door swung wide open. Two more men in dark suits entered the house, their badges clearly visible. They were investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they had been waiting patiently in an unmarked vehicle down the street, coordinating with the FBI. The SEC agents walked straight past the stunned family members, approached Jamal, and immediately secured his wrists in heavy metal handcuffs. The self-proclaimed crypto-millionaire, the man who had mocked my corporate accounting career and convinced my husband to steal my life savings, was now being physically restrained in his mother-in-law's dining room. He was completely stripped of his arrogant facade, reduced to a desperate, sweating criminal caught dead in his tracks. Stephanie stood tall, watching her husband being read his rights, finally breaking the cycle of toxic enabling that had plagued her family for decades. Stephanie stood tall, watching her husband being read his rights, finally breaking the cycle of toxic enabling that had plagued her family for decades. The two federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission firmly gripped Jamal by the arms and escorted him out the front door. He did not say a single word to his wife as he walked past her. He just kept his head down in total disgrace. As the front door closed behind them, the heavy silence of the dining room returned, broken only by the sound of Brenda's quiet sobbing against the wall. Special Agent Reynolds remained standing at the head of the table, carefully documenting the extortion evidence in his notepad. Suddenly, the shock wore off for Bradley. He looked at the empty space where his brother-in-law had just been standing, then looked down at the useless settlement papers on the table. The reality that he was walking away with absolutely $0 finally snapped his fragile mind. His face turned a deep, furious shade of purple. He turned his entire body toward me, his hands balled into tight fists. "Get out!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with pure unhinged rage. "Get out of my house right now, Naomi! You ruined Thanksgiving. You ruined my mother. You set up Jamal. You are a complete psychopath. I am not signing anything, and I am not giving you a single dime. This is our family home, and you are trespassing. Leave right now before I have you physically thrown out into the street." The extended family members, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly began scrambling to gather their coats and purses. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with this disaster. They were practically running toward the back door to escape the federal agent and the impending collapse of Brenda's empire. I did not move an inch. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight in my tailored blazer. I slowly raised my left arm and checked my gold wristwatch. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. "You are deeply confused about who is trespassing, Bradley," I stated, my voice echoing clearly over his screaming. Right on cue, as if the universe itself was responding to my words, the massive crystal chandelier hanging over the dining room table abruptly clicked off. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen died instantly. The entire suburban house was plunged into pitch-black darkness. The only illumination left in the room came from the rhythmic, sweeping flashes of red and blue police lights reflecting through the front windows from the street outside. "What did you do?" Brenda shrieked from the dark corner, her voice trembling with fresh panic. "I did not do anything, Brenda," I replied smoothly into the darkness. "But the utility company certainly did. I canceled the accounts on Tuesday, and they finally pulled the plug. However, the power outage is truly the least of your concerns right now." Before Bradley could shout another threat, the heavy sound of combat boots stomping onto the wooden front porch echoed through the silent house. A loud, authoritative fist pounded on the open front door. 3 beams from heavy-duty tactical flashlights sliced through the darkness of the dining room, blinding Bradley and Brenda. "County Sheriff's Department," a deep voice announced from the entryway. "We are here to execute a formal writ of possession. The grace period for the 3-day notice to pay or quit has officially expired. This property is now under the legal control of Sterling Property Management. Everyone inside this residence must vacate the premises immediately." 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies walked into the dining room, their flashlight beams sweeping over the lavishly set Thanksgiving table, the uneaten turkey, and the terrified faces of my in-laws. A third man, a professional locksmith wearing a utility belt, walked in right behind them, and immediately began unscrewing the brass lock on the front door. "This cannot be happening," Bradley stammered, raising his hands to shield his eyes from the bright tactical lights. "You cannot kick us out on Thanksgiving. We live here. We are in the middle of dinner." "You do not live here anymore, sir." The lead deputy responded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are currently occupying a foreclosed trust property illegally. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather your essential personal identification and any necessary daily medications. Everything else stays inside. If you do not exit the building voluntarily, you will be physically removed and charged with criminal trespassing." Brenda let out a wail of absolute despair, sliding down the dining room wall until she was sitting on the floor in the dark. Her entire manufactured life had just been violently ripped away. Bradley stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, finally realizing that the woman he thought was a submissive, boring accountant had just legally and systematically dismantled his entire existence. The execution was absolute, and they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The execution was absolute, and they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The lead sheriff deputy clicked his tactical flashlight off and pointed a gloved hand toward the open front door. He ordered everyone to move. The extended family members did not need to be told twice. Uncle Robert, Aunt Catherine, and all the whispering cousins practically sprinted out of the house, terrified of being associated with federal crimes and forced evictions. They piled into their respective vehicles, engines roaring to life in the freezing suburban night, and sped away without offering Brenda or Bradley a single word of comfort or a place to stay. They abandoned a sinking ship as quickly as humanly possible. Inside the darkened house, the deputies gave Brenda and Bradley exactly what was promised. 5 minutes. Under the strict supervision of law enforcement, Bradley grabbed his winter coat and his wallet from the hall closet. Brenda, still sobbing uncontrollably, stumbled through the dark kitchen to retrieve her prescription medications and a small handbag. She tried to grab a silver candlestick from the dining table on her way out, claiming it was a precious family heirloom, but the deputy firmly ordered her to put it down. Everything left inside the property now legally belonged to the estate held in trust until the final asset liquidation process was entirely complete. The deputies escorted them out the front door and down the concrete steps. The biting cold of the Chicago November wind immediately whipped around us. Snow had started to fall heavily, dusting the manicured front lawn in a thin layer of freezing white. From the sidewalk, we all turned to watch the locksmith work. The harsh, grinding sound of the drill echoed loudly as the deadbolt was removed and completely replaced. For good measure, a heavy-duty steel padlock was affixed to a newly installed hasp on the front door. The visual finality of the moment was staggering. The 4-bedroom suburban fortress that Brenda had used to taunt her friends and belittle me was officially sealed shut. She was permanently locked out of her own delusion. Special Agent Reynolds walked past us, giving me a brief professional nod before getting into his unmarked vehicle to formally process his extortion report. He informed Brenda that she would be receiving a federal summons from the prosecutor very soon and advised her not to leave the state under any circumstances. As his taillights faded down the street, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was the premium car service I had scheduled precisely for this moment. I adjusted my black blazer, feeling the freezing wind, but entirely unbothered by the cold. My work here was done. As I reached for the door handle of the SUV, Bradley suddenly lunged forward. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the terrifying realization that he was actually about to sleep on the street. He grabbed my arm, his grip desperate and weak. "Naomi, please," he begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "You cannot just leave us here. It is freezing. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at his hand gripping my coat, my expression completely blank. "Take your hand off me, Bradley." He quickly let go, holding his hands up in total surrender. "Please, Naomi, listen to me. It was not me. It was all her." Bradley aggressively pointed a shaking finger at his own mother, who was shivering on the curb. She is the one who wrote that text message telling you to leave. She forced me to go along with it. She is the one who came up with the blackmail scheme with the laptop. I never wanted to divorce you. I love you. I was just stressed about my business and she poisoned my mind. Just let me come home with you to the apartment. We can start over. I will get a real job. I will cut her out of my life completely. Just please do not leave me out here. Brenda let out a fresh wail of absolute agony, betrayed by the very golden child she had spent her entire life protecting and enabling. He had thrown her entirely under the bus, without a single second of hesitation to save himself. It was the ultimate display of his pathetic, spineless character. I looked at Bradley, taking in his red-rimmed eyes and his shivering frame. For 4 years I had compromised my own happiness to keep this man comfortable. I had funded his life, tolerated his disrespect, and endured his mother's cruelty. I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of relief that the financial parasite was finally detached. I opened the heavy door of the SUV and stepped inside the warm leather-lined interior. I rolled the tinted window down just enough to look him directly in the eyes one last time. "You sent me a message saying you decided to distance yourselves from me," I said, my voice sharp and cold as the winter air. "You told me never to look for you again. I am just a good wife honoring her husband's final request. You wanted distance. Now you have a lifetime of it." I pressed the button, and the window smoothly rolled up, cutting off his frantic apologies. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving Bradley and Brenda standing alone in the falling snow, staring at a padlocked house they could never enter again. The image of them standing in the freezing snow, completely defeated and locked out of their own delusion, became my absolute favorite memory. It was the perfect, silent conclusion to 4 years of constant manipulation. Fast forward 6 months, and the reality of their new lives has settled in with a brutal, unforgiving permanence. The divorce was finalized in early March. Without Jamal's fake cryptocurrency, millions to fund a legal defense, Bradley could not afford representation. It took the family court judge less than 20 minutes to rule entirely in my favor, granting the divorce with extreme prejudice and severing all financial ties. But the family court was the least of his problems. The federal tax audit crushed him. Because of the injured spouse allocation, I filed the Internal Revenue Service pinned 100% of the fraudulent claims directly onto him. To pay off the massive federal penalties and avoid a criminal tax evasion sentence, Bradley was forced to get a job. The man who always claimed traditional work was beneath his entrepreneurial genius is now working a minimum wage night shift at a 24-hour logistics warehouse. He spends his nights loading heavy wooden pallets onto freight trucks, his meager wages heavily garnished by the government before he even sees a paycheck. Brenda managed to avoid a federal prison cell, but only barely. Her public defender advised her to accept a brutal plea deal for the extortion charge. She was sentenced to 5 years of strict federal probation and slapped with a mandatory restitution fine that completely bankrupted her. The country club friends she spent decades trying to impress completely blacklisted her the moment her mugshot was published in the local public registry. With her credit absolutely destroyed and no one left to exploit, she was forced to move into a tiny, rusted, single-wide trailer in a deteriorating park on the far industrial outskirts of the city. There are no more catered dinner parties, no more silver luxury vehicles, and no more golden child to hide behind. Jamal is currently sitting in a federal detention center, waiting for his official sentencing hearing. The Securities and Exchange Commission dismantled his entire fake financial empire, exposing it as a massive fraud. He is looking at a minimum of 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Stephanie filed for an immediate divorce, handed over all of his remaining hidden assets and passwords to the federal investigators, and moved to another state to start over completely free of his toxic manipulation. The entire family structure simply devoured itself the second the money stopped flowing. I stepped out onto the sprawling glass balcony of my new penthouse apartment. The warm Chicago spring breeze blew past me, carrying the distant sounds of the city below. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and leaned against the railing, looking out over the magnificent skyline. My career as a forensic accountant has never been better. I was recently promoted to partner at my firm, recognized for my unyielding dedication to exposing financial truths. I want to tell you something incredibly important. Society constantly conditions women to be the quiet peacemakers. We are told to forgive, to endlessly compromise, and to endure toxic behavior simply because it comes from people who share our last name or our marriage certificate. We are taught that setting firm boundaries is selfish, and that prioritizing our own well-being makes us cold. That is a manipulative lie designed to keep you trapped in a cycle of abuse. Your financial independence is your ultimate shield. Protecting yourself legally, knowing exactly where your assets are, and refusing to be treated as a disposable resource is not ruthless. It is absolutely necessary for your survival. You do not have to fight toxic people by screaming, crying, or throwing things. You just have to hold the line, gather your undeniable evidence, and let them destroy themselves with their own blinding arrogance. When you stop funding their illusions and force them to live in reality, the trash takes itself out. If you have ever had to walk away from a family that viewed you as an automated teller machine instead of a human being, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you believe in the absolute power of standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Remember, the greatest revenge is not just exposing their lies to the world. It is building an incredible peaceful life where they are no longer allowed to exist. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. Your story is still being written, and you hold the pen. The story we just explored offers a masterclass in a vital life lesson: the absolute necessity of establishing unshakable financial and emotional boundaries. When dealing with manipulative or parasitic individuals, especially those who use family ties to demand unearned loyalty, it is incredibly easy to get swept into a vortex of guilt and reactive anger. Society often conditions us to be peacemakers, urging us to forgive repeated betrayals in the name of keeping the peace. However, the narrative powerfully illustrates that true protection does not come from screaming louder or pleading for basic respect. It comes from cold, hard preparation and a refusal to participate in the manipulator's manufactured chaos. By stepping back, documenting every interaction, and understanding the legal and financial frameworks that govern our lives, we strip toxic people of their primary weapon, our emotional responsiveness. When you remove emotion from a purely transactional and abusive dynamic, manipulators are forced to confront the harsh reality of their own actions. Furthermore, the story underscores the critical importance of financial literacy. Protecting your credit, understanding your assets, and recognizing legal liabilities are not just tasks for professionals. They are essential survival skills for everyone. Love and familial obligation should never require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You have the fundamental right to secure your future against those who view you merely as a resource to be exploited. It is perfectly acceptable to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Take a thorough inventory of your own financial and emotional boundaries today to ensure you are protecting your peace and your assets from those who might take them for granted.